Hello, and welcome to the Six Figure Developer Podcast, the podcast where we talk about new and exciting technologies, professional development, clean code, career advancement, and more. I'm John Calloway.
I'm Clayton Hunt.
And I am John Ash.
With us today is Guy Royse. Guy works for Redis Labs as a developer advocate, combining his decades of experience in writing software with a passion for sharing what he has learned. Guy goes out into developer communities and helps others build great software. Welcome, Guy.
Thanks for having me. I don't know if I help others build great software, but as I get older, maybe I'm just helping them write mediocre software or fair to middling software.
Well, so before we get into the sort of the meat of things, would you give our listeners maybe a little introduction to yourself? Tell them how you got started in the industry.
Yeah, there's sort of like two creation myths in my career, because I started out with one career and then I moved on to another career.
Nice.
And they're not like radically different careers. It's not like I started out as a bookbinder and then I became a software developer or something like that. I started out as a software developer after I graduated from college in 1994. I'm actually one of those weirdos that's knew what he wanted to do when he grew up. Like I remember in the 80s learning about computers, and I read a book on computer programming, and I said, I'm going to be a computer programmer when I grow up. And then I pursued that and went to college and studied everything, and then got a job writing COBOL of all things. It was on DOS, so it wasn't completely backwards, but backwards is uncharitable. Actually, it wasn't completely dated. I didn't graduate. I never worked on the mainframe. Right. Mm-hmm. And so then, I started a career as a developer, and I quickly went from COBOL to working on other languages. And I spent a lot of time in the Microsoft stack, and I spent a lot of time in the Java stack, and I've spent a lot of time in the JavaScript stack. And about a few years ago, about 10, 15-ish years ago, I started getting interested in speaking in communities, and I started working in consulting, running meetups, that kind of stuff. And that attracted the attention of a startup here in Columbus, Ohio, where I live. And they wanted me to be a developer advocate for their small machine learning startup. And so I took the job because it sounded just cool as hell.
Yeah.
And then that turned into that company got acquired, and that turned into a job as a developer advocate at Redis Labs. And so there's sort of I did all this community stuff just because it was fun, just kind of like we're doing here tonight, right? And that got the attention of someone, and then launched an accidental career that I didn't even think I'd want to pursue. And now I'm a developer advocate instead. And so now I talk about code instead of writing code. Actually, I do write code, but I'm not writing production code. I'm writing sample code, sometimes working on open source libraries, that kind of stuff. But
yeah, so what's that like, developer advocate? I mean, what do you really like about it? Is there anything that you don't like about that? The traditional developer.
Overall, I mostly like it. I mean, it's a job, right? I'm being paid. I'm being paid for a reason, because there are aspects to any job that that are less fun, right?
Sure.
But overall, the work is really satisfying. There's a wide variety of things I do. So I'm making video content. I'll write blog posts. I'll work on open source projects. I'll create sample code. I'll build presentations. I'll go to events. I run our Discord server for Redis, which is at discord.gg/Redis if you want to join. Shameless plug mode ending. But so I'm the admin for the Discord server. And so it's a community stuff and all that kind of stuff. But the thing that I like best about it is all these things tend to be focused around people. Mm-hmm. And so Discord is about building community and interacting with the community and interacting with those people. Going out and speaking at events, giving talks is about people. Making videos is about interacting with the community and helping teach people. And so there's always a people aspect to it. Whereas, there's always a people aspect in engineering too, but it's more layers removed.
Sure.
And so that's what I like about it. Now, and one of the downsides is like, hey, we need you to write a blog post about a topic that you're not very excited about. That happens, right? Or topic that could be controversial in the community. And so that's always stressful, right? But for the most part, those are the exception, not the rule. Mm-hmm. And so it's actually a thoroughly fun job.
Cool.
So tabs versus spaces, or
Spaces.
okay?
I mean, I'm not going to tell you how to live your life, but you should use spaces.
Right. I saw a great tweet the other day. It's,
Two of them, by the way.
Yes.
it was what is your favorite color and why is it blue?
Yeah.
I think that's fair. So, working at Redis Labs, and you have, I'm sure, quite a bit of knowledge about Redis and what Redis is. I would say that my early experience with what Redis is something for cache. Is that accurate? Is that fair? Is that what is the elevator pitch for using something like Redis?
So that's two questions, which is totally cool. So actually, that was my first impression when I looked at Redis too. I actually got the job at Redis Labs because when I was at a previous employer, someone had seen me give a talk, and they had I had done a Dungeons and Dragons themed machine learning talk, and his response to me was he'd seen me talk, and I spoke to him afterwards, but I forgot because you meet a lot of people when you're on the road like that. And but then he messaged me and said, anyone that can combine Dungeons and Dragons and machine learning has a place on my team. And so I'm like, okay, I hadn't used Redis. I was before I was doing machine learning, I was doing a lot of front end development. And so it didn't come up. And then I was doing machine learning stuff. And so it didn't come up. And so I dug into what Redis was, and I'm like, oh, looks like a cache. Now that was my first impression as well. So, and it makes a fantastic cache. It's a big data structure server in memory that is served up over TCP. So, hey, I want to have a hash. I want to have a set. I want to have a list. I just want to have a string, which are really blobs. They're not really strings. They're blobs. And then I want to be able to access that over a network. And that makes a fantastic cache, but it actually can be persisted as well. And so our elevator pitch is Redis is an in-memory NoSQL database. That's sort of our one-line description of it. Of course, it can be a cache as well. My first blog post I wrote for the blog at Redis Labs was sort of an initial impression, and I came to the conclusion that it's actually both. And I actually think that's what's cool about it, is that it has the performance characteristics of a cache, but you can also use it as a database. And so it's like, it's like that old Saturday Night Live bit. It's a floor wax and a dessert topping, or it's a floor polish and a dessert topping, right? It does both of those things. They're not mutual. You can use it for either or, but it does both. So I think I've thoroughly beaten your question to the ground, right?
Yeah. So we've covered what Redis is. What is Redis not? Like, are there things that people use Redis for that they're abusing it, that it shouldn't be used for that, or it was never meant to be a solution for?
Well, I think we can safely say it's not a relational database. Sure. So there's certain ways of thinking about how you store your data that aren't suitable to Redis. When you start thinking about relational databases, you always think about denormalizing that data and eliminating redundancy, rather normalizing that data. In Redis, lots of times to get the performance, you need to denormalize it. So it's like, it's okay that you have duplication in your data because that makes it faster. And because of the nature of how Redis stores things, that works really well. And so I think that's one thing that Redis isn't good at, is storing like highly normalized, don't repeat yourself kind of thing. You can do that, it works, but you will get better performance and a better experience if you allow yourself to experience denormalized data. And that's an architectural decision, of course, depending on what you're doing. Sometimes that doesn't matter. There actually a fun fact, or a fun tidbit. There is like Redis has modules that you can plug into it to sort of extend it and add new capabilities. And one of the modules is basically someone's taken SQLite and made it a Redis module. And so it's like, so you can actually put a relational database inside of your Redis. I don't know if I recommend this or not. I haven't played with it, but there's just there's a delightful perversion in that.
So I'm kind of curious, with it being in memory, and being a database. I mean, I guess the one
How do you
thing
not
that
lose
I
your
think
stuff?
about, yeah, how do you not lose your data?
There's a couple ways to do that. One is that you can do regular snapshots. So there's there's an RDB file. You can say, hey, every so many changes or every so many minutes or so much change in bytes, take a snapshot and write it out to disk. And it'll fork a process and write it out to disk. Now that gives you a window in which you could lose data, right? Because it's like, well, if I do that every 5 minutes, I could lose 5 minutes of data. That might be acceptable depending on your needs.
Yep.
And so that's the decision you can make. There's also an append only file, which is sort of like a transaction log that you can create, which will write out transactions. It'll buffer them and write them out periodically as well. You can have it write out every single transaction as it comes in, but as soon as you do that, you lose the performance benefits of it being in memory.
Right.
And so, so there's always that window where something can happen, where something can fail. The way you mitigate that is you use some sort of high availability or clustering solution. You can do that with open source Redis has Sentinel, which creates a primary and several replicas to back that up. Even that has a window where if the primary goes down, it could have data that hasn't been synced up to the other ones yet. So there's always a window, right? The CAP theorem will always grab you and bind you. Clustering will allow you to do the similar thing. Redis Enterprise, the cloud-based solution, also solves these problems by building clusters that are hidden behind a gateway. It makes it easier to talk to from a client point of view, but it achieves the same effect. So those are ways you can mitigate that by having redundancy across them. You can shorten that window. The window is always going to be there because let's see, CAP theorem is consistency, availability, and partition tolerance, right? And partition tolerance is just always the thing you have to have because it's networked. And so then if you have a network split, the question is do you want it to be consistent or do you want it to be available? And Redis chooses available. And then you can lose the consistency because of that. So, and that's just ultimately all databases have to make this trade-off.
Yep.
So
Why can't you just choose yes?
Yes to all of them.
Yeah.
I also like to run my projects by having the date, the scope, and the quality fixed.
I do that too. File new project.
That's worked out
done.
well for me. Yeah.
So literally the only thing that I've done with Redis is kind of like get key or read key and write key or whatever the commands are. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Get and set.
Yeah. That's literally the only thing I've done. So on that, a couple questions like how big? That's probably the wrong question to ask, but how big of a record can you shove into a single Redis key? Like SQLite database? Is that?
Yeah, actually, that is how it works. It is a SQLite database that's stored in a single key. I should know this number, and I could Google it really quick and then come out smart, but everyone would hear the keyboard. But it's enormous. It's more than you'll care to.
Okay. And that's a good idea?
It depends on what you're doing. Generally, no. The keys themselves actually can be equally large. So the key itself could be, you can make a key that's like 16 megabytes if you wanted to. You could have the key be an image, right? It could be the bytes of an image.
That's awesome. It's just QR code all the keys.
That's right. Yeah. And I mean, the get and set, it's called the string data structure, but it's really a blob because you can store binary data in there, and the keys themselves can be binary data as well. So it doesn't really care. So
okay, that's cool.
I see a comment on Twitch from Code with Sean. Hi, Sean. So it's using eventual consistency. That's a different thing. Redis Enterprise has an active thing where we can do eventual consistency as well using CRDTs. So there's a way to do that too. I didn't want to not address the question in chat. I'm sure this will make for fun editing later when we turn this podcast into something usable.
No problem at all. We usually ignore Code with Sean as much as possible.
Yeah. He just said, okay, cool. So I guess he's good with that, right?
Yeah, He's good fun. Good people. So Clayton, were you going to continue? Sorry.
Yeah. So what is the quick start way to get Redis going? Like how quickly can it be done? Are there best practices for getting Redis up and running in your application?
So okay, so I'm going to say the corporate shill piece first, and then I'm going to talk about the other ones too. So obviously, an easy way to get up and running is if you use a Redis Enterprise Cloud. You can just go sign up. You can get a free 30 megabyte database, which isn't very big, honestly, but it's something you can play with. And then it's like $1 a month to get larger ones. So they're not very expensive. So that's a quick, easy way to get it up and running. You just no hosting, no nothing. You just have an endpoint you connect to it, right? Now that's in a cloud solution. So if you're running something locally on your computer, then there's lag there. But if you're in that same cloud, if you're using AWS or if you're using Azure, or if you're using GCP, then you just pick a Redis instance that's in there, and then you get the latency of being on that same provider in the same AZ. AZ, DC, whatever it is, the region thing.
Region.
Right? I think I said the wrong thing, but regardless.
We understood.
So that's obviously the easiest way to get up and running. And I do that for things sometimes, but I often don't want to have to rely on a network. Like if I'm at a conference giving a talk, I don't want to rely on the network actually working at a conference. And so the other easy way to get it up and running is there's a series of Docker images that you can very quickly get a Redis instance up and running. And so I usually use one called Redis Mod. So there's just one called Redis, and that'll work. But Redis Mod has Redis with several popular modules for doing things like graph databases and probabilistic data structures, and even turn Redis into an AI inference engine. So there's a lot of those that you can play with as well. Time series is another good one in there. Time series and what's the other one I'm thinking of? There's 6 of them. I know there's 6 of them that are in there. I can't remember off the top of my head. And so that's another easy way to get that up and running is just use Docker. And then the third way is you can just download and install it from source. So I've built it from source many times. It's pretty easy on a Mac. It's pretty easy on Linux. It will not work at all on Windows.
Fantastic.
Because it uses fork in the code, and Windows doesn't have an equivalent to that. So there's not a Windows code base for Redis. If you want to do it on Windows, when I need to run Redis on Windows, I just use a Windows subsystem for Linux and install Ubuntu.
Yeah, I was going to say just WSL to it.
Yeah.
So the modules that you mentioned, like I said, I've used the base Redis Docker image for local development, and then once it gets deployed, it's whatever somebody else has set up. I don't know what we're using.
Yeah.
But for the what about the modules? How do you actually use those in, or if you found a module and you wanted to apply it to a Redis instance that you were playing with, how do you actually do that?
So they're actually just .so files. And so you can download the code and compile them, and then deploy that SO file alongside your Redis, and then you can modify your Redis config to point to that file. You can also issue Redis commands and say, load this module from this location on your file system. So you can do that as well. But there's Docker images that do that all. When I'm working with modules, I almost invariably use the Docker images to do that, because it's just all configured and ready to go. It's a lot easier. But if you do, if you want to do that, if you want to do it the hard way, or in essence, right, that's sort of the hard way. The other option is, or it's worth noting that you can deploy, you can write your own modules. I mean, it's just a standard, so anyone can write a module. And so if you had specific stuff you wanted to put into Redis, you could, build a module that like was a dice roller or something like that, because I play D&D, so I have to bring dice into it, right? Or that you could create new data types for whatever you need, right?
Okay, so I've got my AD&D book out, and I've created a Redis module for the random campaign generation or random campaign hook.
Okay.
Can I use that on Redis Enterprise? Like if I'm paying my dollars a month?
No, actually, you can't. The Redis Enterprise only comes with this the 6 modules that Redis Labs built. So you can't. Actually, it doesn't come with all 6 of them. There's 2 that aren't available yet: Redis Gears and Redis AI. And the reason those aren't available yet, and we're working on it, is because Redis Gears lets you run arbitrary Python code in Redis. Which let's make sure we have that properly sandboxed and be really, really sure before we run it. So we're working on that, right? It's just that's harder than adding a couple new data structures. And then Redis AI is a similar problem where it'll allow you to deploy models, AI models, TensorFlow models, or Onyx models, or PyTorch models, and those models could also do arbitrary things if you're not careful. And so there's an extra layer of care being put to figuring out how to do that with the best security.
Okay. Has there been any talk of running custom modules, like if they get that sandbox thing figured out?
I think that's a really interesting idea, and I would like to see that. I think that would be really cool. I don't know that it's really on anyone's radar. I haven't seen it on any product roadmaps. Not that I could like reveal all the product roadmap details anyhow, but you know.
I'll go create
I'm
a
not
GitHub
aware
issue
of,
or something.
Yeah. But I'm not aware of anyone doing talking about that capability. I think that's a really interesting idea, though.
I mean, you know,
I like it. It hadn't occurred to me until you asked.
Yeah.
So
if I did go out of my way to create a module, which I mean, it seems like the community has, it'd be nice to be able to use those in the enterprise offering that Redis has.
Yeah, that would be very nice.
Well,
I see a lot of comments in chat. I feel like they need addressed.
they're just about the beard.
Yeah, most of.
Oh, are
most
they?
of
They're
them
just about the beard.
Yeah.
You put Ash to shame, and
Yeah.
well, I guess me too. But you know,
It's just
fault.
laziness and time.
And none of us had left the house in like a year and a half, right?
Yeah, everyone makes the joke about wearing pants. It's like, oh, we're on Zoom. How do you know I know you're wearing pants? Or when was the last time you put on pants? It's like, no, I put on pants every day. But when was the last time you wore shoes?
I'm in Florida, so like never.
So never, yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the sort of bad practices or bad, sort of practices, I guess, is best I could come up with, but that people use, and then maybe kind of contrast those with sort of what should they be doing.
So there's a certain set of Redis commands that are there, but you almost never want to do them in production.
Okay.
Probably the most infamous one. Obviously, there's a command called flush all and flush db.
Do it.
And what that does is deletes everything. So Redis has this idea of separate databases within it. And this is an idea that the creator of Redis, Salvatore, came up with and then kind of regretted creating. But you can have like 16 separate databases. You can just specify database number, and it's like little segmented versions. And so FlushDB flushes a particular database. Flush all flushes all of the databases. Those are obviously dangerous commands to run in production. So don't do that. But probably the most abusive one in production is keys. And the bad thing is in dev, you get in the habit of doing this all the time. You type key space star, and it will give you a list of all the keys in your data set, in your database. And internally, a database is a big hash table, and it's going to walk that hash table and find every single key and spit it out for you. And so keys is a big O of n operation. So it's a length of time equal to the number of keys you have. Now, if you have 20 keys, that's not a big deal. If you have 1 million keys, that's a really big deal. The other thing about Redis, and the reason this is a big deal, is that Redis is single-threaded. So there's just one big thread. I mean, there are a few edge cases where there's separate processes and threads, but the entire Redis data structure, the entire Redis database, and everything in memory is managed by one thread. And so if you're busy doing keys and returning 1 million records, nobody else can do anything else to that Redis database. And so it locks it for everyone. So if that key star takes 90 seconds to execute, that means no one can do anything to Redis in 90 seconds, which is obviously a big problem. So in production, that's an enormous problem. There are similar commands like that with for looking at sets. You could have a really large set. And, if a set has like a million entries, there's a call smembers, as I like to say it. And smembers has that same problem. You can do the same thing with hashes. You can do an hgetall. Hgetall will return all the values in a hash. If you have a really big hash, again, it's going to lock everything up. And so there's scan and there's hscan and there's sscan. And what they do is they let you paginate through the data and say, give me 10. Okay, now give me the next 10. Now give me the next 10. It takes you just as long to go through all of them, but it doesn't block the server in the same way. So that's a common one. That's an easy one to do because when you're just doing little tiny things, in dev, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Now I'll break this rule for hgetall and smembers specifically if I know that my scope is small. Like if I'm using a hash as basically a record, and I know that record has, 15 columns, right? I just made air quotes for those who are listening to the podcast later. Then I'll go ahead and call hgetall because I know that I've built a thing that makes that safe.
Got it.
So it's not always, it's not a never. It's like anything, right? It depends.
Sure.
So those are some of the things. I know we actually have a blog post on the 7 worst things, or worst practices for Redis.
Yeah, no password being the number one at the top there.
Yeah, that's easy to do. Yeah, he actually says this one also has numbered databases /select, that database thing I was talking about. Select is the command you use to switch between them.
Gotcha.
So just don't use those. Yeah. But there's this is a really good one actually. Here is number 5 on this blog post is 1 request per connection. So, open a connection, do a thing, throw it away. Redis isn't optimized for that. There are some clients, depending on your language, that you use Redis that will do connection pooling for you. Mm-hmm. But like I spend a lot of time in JavaScript, and so I don't use connection pooling in JavaScript because JavaScript's going to have that single thread anyhow. The node is, and Redis has a single thread. So there's actually no benefit in having multiple connections because that connection is never going to be doing more than one thing at a time anyhow. And so generally when I'm using Node, I create that connection and I just hang on to it for the entire life of the process.
I'll be right back. I need to change some code.
I just realized that the Redis Lab site was asking me if it was okay to send me cookies, and there was a chat bot, so I was just closing those things. So,
like Clayton, I think my first experience with Redis was a couple of years ago, starting out with a blog post or a tutorial, following along with getting up and running with a Docker container, and it was very much here are the commands that you need in development. By the way, don't use these commands going forward. So I'm like, oh, that's so very helpful. Thank you.
Well, the bad thing is you develop a muscle memory for those commands. Mm-hmm. And then it's just really easy to just spit, just a little machine gun fire them out on your keyboard. And then you're like, oh crap.
So I think it'd be fun to have like a community driven game or something where, I don't know, maybe you're searching for something, but if you pick up the wrong item, it does a flush and you lose, and the entire community loses all progress.
And that's why we don't let Clayton in charge of those games. Yeah. So what else? We've talked about the multiple purposes for Redis and the multiple uses. And I think I've run across it before as being used for like message servicing, services and things like that. Are there other use cases that we haven't discussed?
Yeah, the message. So message queuing, servicing, communication kind of things. There's a couple ways that can work that are interesting. Like if you just want to build a basic queue, I think there's some Ruby libraries around this that's where you can just use a list as a queue. In fact, there's a command that will pop a thing from one side of a list and then push it to the other side of another list. So you can send things to other queues and do that as one transaction in Redis. It's like it's L pop right R. I can never remember the command. I always have to look it up, but it's got this complicated L and R for left and right, and then push pop. And so if you want to use a list as a queue, it works really well because Redis is all those transactions are in a single thread. Everything's atomic. And so that makes it a really safe thing to do. If you want to go up another level, there's a pub sub available on Redis. And so you can, it's a fire and forget listening, posting, publishing and subscribing service, right? So I can say publish an event with a particular name, and then I'll subscribe to events that have a particular pattern. So they start with like, foo : star, and anything that starts with foo : notify me of that. You can actually even turn on key space notification, and it uses that same mechanism. So you can say, if any keys in this particular key space change, so like any key that starts with foo : tell me when it changes, and then you can get notifications of changes to the database itself as well. And so you can use pub sub for that. Pub sub's kind of cool because it lets you do that. It's cross process, right? So I'm connected from this machine and this machine here, but I can still do publish of events and then receive them on other machines. It even works with clustering, although there are scalability issues with clustering. Whereas as you add clusters, the performance actually will eventually drop because the communication between them grows too quickly. But if your usage is below those thresholds, which in many cases it will be, then that's a great way to, spread out the load of everything else. And you're spreading out your Redis instance anyhow, and so you can do pub sub across those machines as well. So that's another way. And then the coolest way, I think, is Redis has streams. So we have a streams type that's part of open source Redis. This isn't a module. And so you can publish to those streams and read from those streams and use that as like for anything you would use a stream for, as just a list of events. You can use that as a microservice, a bus for a microservice architecture. You can use that for anything
cool.
you'd use streams for.
Yeah, that's super cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and actually some of the modules are cool because with the streams, like the gears is the thing that lets you run arbitrary Python code on your instance, which it can be safe depending on what you're doing. You just need to be careful. And so one of the things that in Gears can do is it can monitor streams. And so whenever a new event happens on a stream, it triggers code that's running on your server and then can do other things. It's like, well, when someone writes this message, just run this code that's running on Redis and update this key, put this value in this hash, that sort of thing.
So Redis is like the ultimate dev tool. It can be a cache, a database, a service bus. It can be just anything that it does. It has modules for like AI stuffs. Like it can be just about anything that you need as an assistance on the dev side. And then, if you can get your company to deploy all those things, it can do the same thing on the server side.
The guy who created it is Salvatore Sanfilippo. So you can, looking at his name, you can guess I think he's Italian. I could be wrong. I hope he's not Sicilian. I got that wrong. Sorry. But look at all the things you do. You think he was Swiss, right? Knives are fantastic. Yeah. So it does do a lot of things. Which is kind of like a Swiss Army knife. I really hadn't thought of that as an analogy until just now, but yeah, I like that.
Very cool. You had mentioned the Discord server that you run.
Yeah.
Are there any additional resources that you might point our listeners to who are looking to get started with Redis and don't really have a place to start? So
we have a developer site at developer.redislabs.com. And so that's another place you can go to learn about Redis. If you want to learn the page for open source Redis is at redis.io. I go there because it's got a big document. It's got a thorough documentation of all the commands because there's hundreds of commands and I don't have them all memorized. Like I was looking through them the other day and I found this command called stralgo. Stralgo. It's STR algo, string algo. And what it is it allow you to run a string algorithm to measure the LCS is the one algorithm it does right now, which is like how different are these two strings.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can point it to two keys, or you can just give it two hard-coded strings and it will do a comparison there. So I'm like, I didn't even know that was there. Right? There's a if you have a set, there's a S random or S rand, I can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
It will give you a random item from that set.
Nice.
Right. So there's 1,000,001 commands that you just don't realize are there. And so Redis.io is a great resource for that. And then, go to redislabs.com if you want to sign up for the free enterprise account as well, and play around with that. Again, that's the easiest way to get up and running if you aren't really a Redis, if you're a Redis noob. You can get that up and running. We've got a client called Redis Insight, which is a sort of a GUI client that'll let you talk to Redis just using raw Redis commands. So
cool.
So those are all good resources, and I'll make sure there's links for all these things. I don't have all the links memorized off the top of my head, and audio is not the best way to share these things anyhow.
We can put them in the show notes.
So I think that's it for resources. I don't know that I have any other good resources. Are there any other good questions? Any questions in chat?
I've been dropping the links to the resources that we've been mentioning in chat as well, making sure to take note of those. So we'll include those in the show notes as well. But yeah, chat, feel free to ask questions if we don't get them addressed during the recording of the podcast. Guy was kind enough to say he wouldn't mind sticking around afterwards and continuing the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what has been helpful in your career that you might share with those just getting started or those looking to level up their own careers?
I actually get asked that question quite a bit. And I've got several pat pieces of advice I tend to give people. And so I'll trot one of those out right now. But it's actually really good advice. So I think it is anyhow. Maybe I'm biased. But it's the never stop learning advice, right? So before I took the job with Redis Labs, a person recruited out to me, and I wasn't pursuing it immediately. And then later on, I pursued it. I looked at Redis and said, I hadn't looked at Redis, right? And I looked at it and I thought it was a cache. And so I had to learn that, right? And I've been writing software for quite a while. And so there's a reminder in there for younger developers and for newer developers who may not be young, but that no one knows what the heck they're doing. We're always all learning. And so, yeah, right. It's sort of the imposter syndrome thing. Like everyone talks about imposter syndrome. You feel like you don't know what's going on, and everyone else does, and no one else knows what they're doing either. And we're all learning as we go. And that's just kind of part for the course. So never stop learning, because it's actually just part of the job. Learning is part of the job. So, and don't get discouraged if you don't know a thing, because odds are there's others that don't know that thing. The people who know that thing didn't know it until they learned it. I used to talk about this when I'd pair program, when I would coach pair programming. I would say, people go into pair programming, if they haven't done it, they're kind of anxious. They don't like it, right? I love it because I'm an extrovert, and I'm like, yay, I get to talk to people all day and write code. This is the best thing ever, right? But a lot of people are like, but I became a programmer because I didn't like people all that much. They're introverts, and then they're like, and then they sort of violated that. But other people would go into that and they'd think, I'm going to go into this pairing session and I'm going to be revealed for the fraud that I am, right? And so that, that's that imposter syndrome. But the reason you feel that way, the heart of imposter syndrome is that you're comparing someone's outward appearance to how you are inside. So it's an outside versus inside comparison, which is inaccurate. Because you know what you don't know. You know all the details. You know all the dark corners and weird things that are in your brain. You know all that stuff. You know all the nitty details about yourself. But someone else comes out and they look shiny and polished on the outside, and it's like, well, I could never be that person. And then you have to pair with them, and it's uncomfortable. It's kind of the same thing that social media does a little bit, where people present polished personas on platforms like Instagram, and then everyone always feels bad because their life isn't as good as everyone's on Instagram's is, and it's like, well, no, they're just they're presenting a made up, as in putting makeup on, not as in manufactured version of their life. Actually, manufactured might be a good word too, actually. So yeah, that's kind of convoluted career advice, but I feel like it's important.
Yeah, definitely. And those developers, I feel like, who I've run into who have stopped learning or believe that they've sort of know it, they always seem to be the worst developers.
Yeah.
Where can our listeners go to follow you and sort of keep up with what you're working on?
So I always appreciate a good follow on Twitter. My Twitter ID is, you see here on stream, it's at Guy Royse. And that's Royse if you're listening to this in audio, not Royce. That's someone else. But the reality of it is that there aren't very many people that have my name. And so if you just Google me, you find me. In fact, if you type my last name wrong into Google, it will say, did you mean Guy Royse with an S?
Nice.
Which I feel like is my best accomplishment in life. I mean, yeah, I've had kids and everything, but that's definitely it, right?
So you're Google verified, is what?
Yeah. I don't think I'm verified anywhere. I'm not that important. I'm not very important at all, actually. But Google, the search engine seems to know who I am. So, but yeah, so my user ID on almost every social media platform is at Guy Royse. So that you'll find Twitter, github.com/Guy Royse, twitter.com/Guy Royse. And honestly, just type it in Google and you'll find all the stuff. I have guyroyse.com. I also have guy.dev, but it just redirects to guyroyse.com.
Nice.
Yes, I'm squandering that domain name to just redirect to another domain name. I got guy.dev.
Yeah, Clayton logged on this afternoon and said, all right, we're talking to a guy about a thing, and then looked at him and said, oh, we're talking to Guy.
Yeah, we are talking to a guy about a thing. Can you give me some Redis? Yeah, I know a guy. Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been great. Chat hangout for just a bit. We're going to wrap up the podcast from here, and be sure to stick around. Clayton is going to show us his professional photo. You're not going to want to miss that. With that, again, guys, Guy is kind enough to say that he'll stick around and at least hang out with us for a few more minutes. Make sure we get all your questions asked and answered. So, go ahead and load up chat with anything that you're dying to know about Redis, about Guy, about Dungeons and Dragons, really about anything. We're more or less free game from here on out. So with that, we'll say, Guy, thanks so much. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
That was Guy Royse. Guy works for Redis Labs as a developer advocate, combining his decades of experience in writing software with a passion for sharing what he has learned. Guy goes out into developer communities and helps others build great software.
1 second. I lost it. I had to find it. If you like this episode, please like, rate, and review on iTunes.
Find show notes, blog posts, and more at sixfiguredev.com.
Catch us live each week on Twitch and follow us on Twitter at sixfiguredev.
That's fix.
See how many tries it takes us to
We say it every week.
Right.
Talking is hard. Yeah.
This has been another episode of the Six Figure Developer Podcast, helping others reach their potential. I'm John Calloway.
I'm Clayton Hunt.
And I am John Ash.
All right,
So
we've
yes,
stopped
code
recording.
with Code with Sean. You would think we would memorize it, but since both John and I have signed off as Clayton, we clearly aren't great at figuring
Clearly
this
have
sort of
not
things
figured
out.
it out yet.
Yes. Talking's hard, reading's hard. We're also being blinded by lights. It's good stuff.
Revved up like a deuce, right?
Yeah. Yeah, my almost 9-year-old has been really enjoying the YouTube videos of the misheard lyrics and singing them out loud. Singing words that he really doesn't understand. It's
Those are
great
the best.
stuff. Like,
I think my worst one was In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins, where he says, "Oh Lord, oh Lord." I thought he was like not saying his H as like a Cockney accent, and he was saying, "Oh, hold on." And I didn't realize that until I played GTA 5 and they subtitled the song.
Nice. Wow.
and there is Clayton's professional photo.
No, they can't see it yet.
Oh, come on. I can see it. Why can't?
You should look at mine on LinkedIn.
Because you're special.
I know you've seen it, right?
Oh yeah. We've got quite a handful of links that we'll include in show notes. Twitter, LinkedIn, GitHub, GuyRoyse.com, Redis Labs, blog author, and then Redis.io, Redis Labs, topic streams intro, Redis gears, developer.Redis Labs. And I guess that was one of the things that didn't get a chance to talk about during the episode, but I was always confused early on in my introduction to Redis of the difference between Redis.io and RedisLabs.com.
That confused me when I started the interview process, actually. So that is confusing. Yeah. And Redis.io is managed by by the group that manages open source Redis. Originally it was managed by Salvatore, but he's not involved anymore. And so so now there's like I can't remember the official title for them. They're the Jedi Council, right? They're the open source council. There's several community members from different companies that head that up. And so they're responsible for maintaining Redis.io at the moment. And so that's kind of, they're two things. It's a great reference. I use the Redis.io/commands is my most, one of my big URLs I hit all the time. Because it's just, hey, I don't have them all memorized, and there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
So.
And usually I'll stick with using one of the libraries that is a wrapper, like a .NET library around Redis, and using one of those. Do you have a preferred mechanism for interacting with Redis in something like C# or?
For C#, Stack Exchange Redis is the go-to client. It's got some issues that only happen in kind of edge cases, but overall it's pretty solid. The way it does multiplexing can both give you a lot of efficiency, but can also starve a Redis server. Because what it'll do is you'll send all your commands from your different threads, and then it'll go in and then it'll multiplex them in to one connection, and then it'll do a pipeline. And so pipelining in Redis is when you open a connection, you just keep sending it commands, and then it'll return everything back. So you can say set, and then it'll return okay. And then, but it's only one round trip, right? Mm-hmm. But if that pipeline gets really, really full, that's all going to execute on one thread, which is going to lock other things out. So that's a thing to watch out for when you're using Stack Exchange Redis. The load is pretty high. I mean, Redis is pretty fast, and so your load has to get really high for that to be a problem. But that is a thing that happens with it. I tend to spend a lot of time in the JavaScript space with Node, and my go-to client is IO Redis. There's an older one called Node Redis, which I believe is in the process of getting a facelift. But IO Redis supports promises and all the modern JavaScript capabilities you would expect. Node Redis has been a little bit neglected over the last few years. And so there's been a bunch of stuff done on a branch lately on GitHub for adding promises and that sort of capability to it. So hopefully it'll get up to speed, and because it's what you get when you do npm install Redis. And so it's going to be forever the most popular.
Very cool.
So
are you working on any new blog posts, or what's keeping you busy these days?
Conferences and videos, and running the community. I'm getting ready. I'm also getting ready to kick off the Redis meetup. We're going to do an online Redis meetup every month, starting next month. So it's going to be every third Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. And we don't even have I don't have a speaker lined up yet, but we're going to be doing it.
You have a link or anything for people to follow along and be sure to?
No, I don't have anything yet, actually.
Okay.
That's none. I'm scrambling to get all that ready.
Okay.
So I've been doing that. I did a series of videos on GraphQL using Node, using Apollo GraphQL, and exposing Redis data with GraphQL. And that's been fun. I was able to use Redis and Redis search. So Redis search with Redis search, you can say, hey, monitor all these hashes that match a key pattern, or monitor all this JSON that matches a key pattern. And then you can do searches against it, full text searches and value searches, and even geo-aware searches. So, give me all the records that are within 25 miles of this particular location or something.
Nice.
And so I got a video series on that where I found a haunted places data set. And so I loaded them all into Redis, and then I'll show you how, and then expose a GraphQL interface to let you search and find those and walk the object graph of those haunted places. Right. So I've been spending a lot of time on that. That is on the Redis Labs YouTube channel.
Okay.
Which is youtube.com/Redis Labs.
Nice.
First video is out. The second one premieres tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern. So I'll be in the chat there. And then I have a third video that was probably coming out Thursday, but it might be next week. I don't know if it's been scheduled yet. So. All right.
And Code with Sean says KCDC's call for speakers or call for presenters is open.
I should probably submit. I should probably get around to that.
Sean, do you have a link for that as well? We'll get that in chat so others can.
I'm going to submit, Sean. Don't you worry. I'll be. I think I've got a buddy coming in from the Netherlands that wants to make sure that I'm there. So, because I haven't seen him in a couple of years, and so he's like, I'm going to go even if I'm not accepted. He just wants to go to Kansas, I guess. Kansas City, not Kansas. It's in Missouri.
Code with Sean put in a link that looks awfully suspicious. Anybody want to click on that one?
I think that link is totally reliable. It will probably not give you up.
Right.
Or let you down.
Right.
It's not going to run around and take you to other parts of the internet that you don't want to see.
Nice.
So my best Redis related story was when we were working on a project, consulting for Microsoft, and sort of using Azure when Azure was like really, really baby, and early infantile. We were using their like dog food stuff, and we were new to Redis, and we were like, hey, we have this really big, massive object coming back from a very slow, like big graph objects, very complex and whatnot. And we're like, we need to cache this because it's really slow, and Redis seems pretty sweet, and it's cacheable, So the first thing we thought of was just take the whole object and serialize it, and down, of course, serializing complex objects in C# is always a great idea. Well, it created
almost even better in Java.
It created a very, very large payload, and we started. We deployed our code, and it was working great for us. But evidently, over the weekend, when they were using our tool, we actually took down Azure because they had no throttle limits, and so we just basically were pulling all of the bandwidth out of the that region that we were deployed to. So that they were not so happy, but Redis kept up delivering. So good.
That's actually an interesting observation, because one of the things you realize is once Redis, the storage, because it's in memory, once it becomes really fast.
Yes.
Then your next bottleneck is network.
Yeah.
And so network becomes the next bottleneck. And so, it's latency is the new outage, right? Yep. And so that's once you're in memory, the disk used to be the super slow thing, but once you eliminate the disk, then network becomes the slow thing you need to worry about. That's how why Redis can get away with being single threaded. because you just don't spend a lot of time in it. It's like it's kind of the same trick Node pulls, right? Node.js has that single threaded thing going on as well. It's actually the same architecture it was used for Windows 3.1. Way back in the day. Windows 3 had the message loop, right? And it's the same architecture. Let's have one thread and then have everything, and then just loop through all the requests. And depending on what you're doing, that can be faster because you don't spend all the resources trying to keep track of shared state.
Yeah.
Now, that's the trade-off, right? And that's what Node chose to do. And Redis does a similar thing, except Redis is written in C. And so it's just like screaming fast. Whereas Node is, it's JavaScript code, and it's sort of compiled by V8. V8 will like do compilations of JavaScript code, but there's limitations on how much it can compile it because JavaScript doesn't have really types. It does, but it doesn't. And so it makes it harder to compile it.
See, if we could get Redis built on JavaScript, though, I saw something the other day where they were running Node in the browser. So then we could run Redis in the browser. And then we could take up the client's memory.
And that gets rid of the network problems.
Yeah,
I'll do you one better. Someone took Redis and took the C code and compiled it to WebAssembly.
Oh, so we're already there.
There you go.
Skip
We're there.
Node.
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, screw Node. We don't need Node. Wherever we're going, we don't need no Node.
Here.
So,
Ash
obviously,
get
it
that.
wasn't super useful. Yeah.
There's been a lot of things that I don't
but
get
it could
in
be
this.
super useful now with all the new WebAssembly stuff that's going on.
That's true. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening in the WebAssembly space.
It's probably a better system than the built-in browser databases too, right?
Well, it would, in the case of using Redis and WebAssembly, it would be using the shared memory that WebAssembly uses to store as the heap.
Oh, okay.
And but you wouldn't have any way to persist it.
Who needs persistence?
That's right. It's in the browser. It's supposed to go away.
just persist it to local storage. It's fine.
Right. Yeah. Could you hook into an event like the window close event to take the Redis instance and put it into local storage?
Probably. I mean, you could do that you could make WebAssembly do that.
I mean, we spent an hour and a half on Clayton trying to write his own operator last week.
We're not done.
Nico, we have a Wednesday project.
So you know what we're doing on Wednesday. more stuff no one ever should do. So Guy, I know you were doing a lot of talks. I think you did like D&D with TDD or TDD D&D.
Putting the D&D and TDD.
Yeah.
There it is.
So are you still doing those types of talks or
not as much. I did putting the D&D and TDD at CodeMash in 2020 and back in January, and that's the last time I did that talk. Probably won't be doing that much in the future. It doesn't really. I mean, I think it's cool, but it doesn't really dovetail with what Redis needs me to do. Right? It's not really on mission. So. Not that everything has to be specifically directly about Redis. I mean, a good talk is going to be provide a lot of value and then also talk about the thing. So like I've got a talk called Dungeons, Dragons, and Graph Databases, which I've been doing a lot lately. And it's basically an intro to graph databases. My demos are using Redis Graph. And it's D&D themed. So I'm adding a lot of value, but I'm also sort of plugging Redis a little bit. And so, so that kind of stuff is typically what I'm doing now. I got a talk I want to do. I'm trying to figure out how to do it. I bought one of these web software defined radios, the Web SDR dongles. Have you seen these? Just for everyone else's edification, I'm going to grab mine so everyone can see what I'm talking about as I bump the microphone.
You don't have yours ready, Ash?
No.
So these guys right here, right? So it's a USB on one side and it's an antenna connector on the other, right? And one of the really cool things you can do with this is you can just listen to any radio broadcast. Well, not any, but many. And one of the ones you can do is you can listen on 1090 megahertz, which is the frequency the airplane's transponders report on.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it's really funny. There's a tool called Dump 1090 that will automatically connect your SDR and dump out to the console, and also set up a little TCP server publishing all the transponder signals it receives from aircraft in your area. And so I built a little janky antenna, put it in a window in my office. There's actually a window behind that metal panel back there. I just cover it up so that I don't have light behind me when I record. And I just put this janky little antenna made out of some coaxial cable in the window and was able to pick up aircraft 60 miles away.
Wow.
Which is pretty cool. Well, the guy who wrote this Dump 1090 software that talks to it and pulls us out is the same guy that wrote Redis.
Nice.
Which is really kind of funny, right? And he publishes things in this format that there's a node library that knows how to read. Like there's a standard format that come out. And so I was able to take aircraft events saying, I'm here. You know, the transponder says, I'm this aircraft. I'm at this altitude, at this heading, and I'm at this exact latitude and longitude. So you know, so it gives you like a radar map of where all the aircraft are at. So I was able to write like 7 lines of code that was able to read from the server and then write out to a Redis stream. And so I want to put together a talk where I like track aircraft with Redis and do a talk about streams and how you can use streams and stream architectures, and build out a little sample app that's just basically logs all the aircraft and then turns that into more useful data. Because I think that'd be really, really cool. And it would make such a great demo at a conference.
Yeah.
Because you could literally pick up aircraft that are in the area. And it's a global standard. So I could give that talk anywhere in the world and it would work.
Nice.
Yeah, you should totally do that. That is so cool.
I just think that would be just cool as hell.
Yeah, Clayton and I were running a meetup here in the Tampa, St. Petersburg, Florida area, and we did an IoT Saturday morning lesson session with a group and got some IoT devices from Microsoft, and one of our regulars came in and he had one of the antennas and he was tracking incoming flights and had already gotten some of the application together and like visualizing it on a map and things. So those are really, really cool devices. Yeah,
there's I think it's called Flight Radar. Something I can't remember the name of the software. I have to look on my Windows machine to find out. But there's a software that knows how to talk to Dump 1090, and we'll just put it on a screen for you. You just look in your area and you can see where all the aircraft are at. It's kind of fun. The funny thing is when I've showed this to a few people, their response is always like, "Is that legal?"
No.
It's like yes, it's actually very important that everyone know where all the aircraft are at, because that way you don't fly into them. Right?
Yep.
You know, we don't want anyone to not broadcast where they're at just because they couldn't get some clunky piece of software to work. We want it to always work, and so it's just all broadcast in the clear.
Yeah, it's those airplanes that aren't broadcasting. Those are the problem ones.
That's right.
Yeah, you got to pick those up with radar.
It's kind of fun because I can sit there and watch. It's like, oh, it's a Saturday. And it's a nice day. Oh, look at all the Cessnas. Yeah. And you sit there at night and you watch the flights and you see a few commercial flights. You see like, you know, Delta Airlines coming in and that kind of stuff. And then it gets later and then it's all just like FedEx and DHL planes flying back and forth. So it's interesting seeing the patterns of, you know, who's flying when and what. Occasionally you see police helicopters. That's kind of neat. They're usually a little bit lower, so you don't pick them up as far away. But
Code with Sean put flightaware.com link in chat. Yeah, it looks like there's so there are, oh, there's actually more. Oh yeah, I forgot there's a military base. There are 3 airports near me, but then also a military base and apparently some other airstrips I was not aware of.
The most disturbing thing that you're able to do with this is you can actually pick up pages for pagers.
Wow.
And the vast majority of those pages are for hospitals, for doctors. And it's kind of shocking how many HIPAA violations you can see go scrolling across your screen.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like really. That's kind of amazing, but
Yeah, Code with Sean says it's amazing to see how many planes are in the air at any one time. That was my first reaction as well. Is just looking at the map of the United States, and it's mostly covered.
The other thing that was what was the other thing? With the web SDR that I thought was interesting. I can't remember now. It fell on me. Oh, I was able to talk to my my water meter. Well, to read it. So your water meter and your power meter will broadcast their numbers every 5 minutes so that when a truck drives through the neighborhood, they can read your meter remotely. And so you can actually monitor your water meter and stuff like that too. So I was able to figure out which water meter was mine and pick up the signals from it as well, which is kind of fun. And it actually is another good streaming use case. Like there's all this data being broadcast in your environment and they're all events. And so they all kind of naturally would fit into streams. Like, my water meter said this and my neighbor's water meter said this. Because you can see your neighbor's water meters too. Now you don't know whose are whose, right? There's no numbers. I was able to figure out it was mine because the number it said for the usage matched what was on my water meter, and I'm like, that's probably mine. But gathering that data and publishing that into a stream.
You only have to do that visual inspection once though to get that match, and then you just
and then you just write down your the ID number that it broadcasts out, and then you know which one's yours. And I found some gas meters, some water meters, and some electric meters in my neighborhood. There are about a few dozen that seem to be in range.
And there was a petroleum pipeline on the East Coast. And
those were other hackers.
That wasn't me. Sorry. Over 9,000 planes in the air right now. Over 9,800 planes in the air right now.
Sean said, wow, Atlanta is the busiest airport right now. That's always true. Come on.
Isn't Atlanta one of the top 3 busiest airports in the world?
I think it's like one of the busiest. It's definitely the busiest airport in the U.S. I say that with much confidence, but now I'm not sure that's true. But let's go with that's true.
It's up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are busier air spaces like around New York, LaGuardia, like that airspace is busier.
Yeah, but they've got a couple airports. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's probably other places in Asia that are really busy as well.
Yep.
Right.
Well, Guy, this has been a blast. We could probably continue the conversation all night, but want to be respectful of your time. Cool. So we can probably call it a night there and say, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. We're looking at about 2 weeks from today for releasing the episode, unless you've got something you'd like us to coordinate with.
No, that's all fine. Okay. I don't have there are no plans.
That's usually how we operate as well. But there will be a fair amount of editing in this episode. Episode, like my voice cracking.
Episode.
Missing the intro, whatever. Cutting out our scolding of Code with Sean. Oh yeah, we'll roll a D20 dice to decide.
Yeah, And I'm watching Twitch go by. I'm like, I need to start streaming again. I haven't been streaming enough lately. I've got too many irons in the fire right now, and so my evenings have filled up. I was testing out StreamYard the other day, and so I went streaming on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch, and then all of a sudden everyone's like, "Oh, hey, it's Guy."
Nice.
I should probably get back into this.
Yeah, it's good fun. Be sure to blast out when you're on. We'll tune in.
And what I need to do is do a show like you guys do instead of like coding, because then I can just, the prep work is you got to coordinate speakers and all that kind of stuff. But then like a lot of this prep was just show up.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
you had to gather questions and stuff. There's a little bit of work, but it's not, research this technology so I can teach others about it.
you like to chat. So there's other streamers like Fierce Kittens. Like she'll get on when she's just sewing and just talk to people. So you could just get on and say howdy do.
Yeah, I'm thinking about doing a Tech Friends chat, like a weekly Tech Friends, where it's just like get some randos. It's like, hey, we got a group of like 5 people and we just talk about whatever we're going to talk about. And because that's like the easiest way to build a show at all. We could call it. It could be the model view.
There
Nice.
you go.
There's no controller.
Yeah. Yeah. You down with MVC? Yeah, you know me. Yeah.
Nice. Well, all right, folks. With that, we'll say again, Guy, thanks so much. If there's anything you need from us or anything we can do for you, be sure to let us know. Do
Absolutely.
tweet out and let us know when you're streaming. We'll be sure to tune in.
Absolutely.
With that, we were about to raid, and he left. Who do we?
It sounds like it wouldn't have been that good of a raid.
Whom shall we raid?
So changing who we're
Saruman.
raiding. Let's see. Fist of the Forgotten Game Dev. I think that sounds like our winner. So we'll raid our friend over here, and chat. Join us over there. Be sure to join us again on Wednesday night at 8 p.m. where we'll live stream some live coding, probably working on Clayton's game engine, because that seems to be what we do these days, and keeping up the friendly banter. So if you like Blazor and game engine and friendly ribbing, then be sure to join us at 8 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, and then we'll be back again next Monday for the live stream of the podcast. And with that, we'll say goodnight and catch you later.
Good night, everyone.